Chapter 4 of Caroline the Illustrious, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This is Chromium Jade, Caroline the Illustrious, Volume 2, by William Henry Wilkins. Chapter 4. The Royal Family, 1728. Frederick Louis, the eldest son of George II, still remained at Hanover, though now direct heir to the throne of England, and his father made no sign. Remembering perchance what a thorn he, when Prince of Wales, had been in his father's side, the king was afraid lest his heir should treat him likewise, and the queen, whose affection had gone to her younger son, William Duke of Cumberland, agreed with her husband as to the advisability of keeping their firstborn away from England as long as possible. This is more extraordinary when it is remembered that the policy of George I in keeping Frederick at Hanover was, in the early part of his reign, one of his son's grievances against him, and he and the princess frequently urged, both in private and public, that their son should be brought to England. But after the birth of William, Duke of Cumberland, they completely changed their minds, and were as anxious to keep Frederick at Hanover as they had been formerly to have him in England. They would have liked to supplant the elder brother by the younger, who was born on British soil, to give Prince Frederick Hanover only, and reserve the throne of England for Prince William. They forgot that the English crown was not theirs to give. In the latter days of George I's reign, Walpole urged upon the old king the advisability of bringing his grandson to England, and George would, it was said, have brought him back with him after his last visit to Hanover, but his death on the road thither changed all this. Neither the king nor queen had any affection for their eldest son, who had grown up a stranger to them, and of whom they had received unfavorable accounts. On the other hand, it is only fair to say that Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who was by no means given to flattering anyone, were he prince or peasant, on her visit to Hanover in 1716, spoke strongly in Frederick's favor. She writes, "Our young prince, the Duke of Gloucester, has all the accomplishments that it is possible to have at his age, with an air of sprightliness and understanding, and something so very engaging and easy in his behavior that he needs not the advantage of his rank to appear charming. I had the honor of a long conversation with him last night before the king came in. His governor retired on purpose, as he told me afterwards, that I might make some judgment of his genius by hearing him speak without constraint. And I was surprised by the quickness and politeness that appeared in everything he said, joined to a person perfectly agreeable, and the fine fair hair of the princess. The fact that Frederick had grown up under his grandfather's influence prejudiced his parents against him, and more especially when they heard that he espoused the old king's side in the family quarrel. On the other hand, his father's tardiness in summoning him to England after his accession, and his refusal to pay the debts he had made at Hanover, created a bad feeling on Frederick's part towards his parents. Thus matters stood for more than a year after the coronation, despite the representations of Walpole and the clamors of the opposition, who attacked the government for not forcing the king's hand in this matter. The Privy Council represented the dangers that would ensue from suffering the heir to the throne to remain so long away from the country over which he would one day, under Providence, reign. The king listened very unwillingly, but while he was hesitating, an incident occurred which hastened his decision. Prince Frederick, it was remembered, was betrothed more or less formally to Princess Wilhelmina of Prussia, and his grandfather had promised that the nuptials should be solemnized when he next came to Hanover, but his death postponed the marriage. George II and Caroline, though they did not absolutely refuse the alliance, declined to be bound by the late king's word, and stipulated that their daughter Amelia should marry the crown prince of Prussia as a compensation. The Queen of Prussia was more than willing, but the King of Prussia did not want Amelia for a daughter-in-law any more than the King and Queen of England wanted Wilhelmina, and so matters came to a standstill, to the despair of the Queen Sophie Dorothea. "I will not have a daughter-in-law," said the King of Prussia to his queen, who carries her nose in the air and fills my court with intrigues as others are already doing. Your master Fritz, the crown prince, shall soon get a flogging at my hands, and then I will look out for a marriage for him. The crown prince was quite ready to marry Amelia or anyone else, if it would give him some independence and protection from his father's ill usage. Prince Frederick at Hanover declared himself in love with Wilhelmina, whom he had never seen, but Wilhelmina was anything but in love with Frederick. Her mother had so dinned him into her ears, and had given her such accounts of him, that she had grown to dislike him. "He is a good-natured prince," the queen said to her daughter, "kind-hearted but very foolish. If you have sense enough to tolerate his mistresses, you will be able to do with him what you like." Wilhelmina declared that this was not the ideal husband of her young dreams. She wanted someone who she could look up to and respect, and she certainly could not respect Frederick. Prince Frederick's vanity was piqued at the delay, and he was indignant at his father's neglect. So early in the year 1728, he determined to take matters into his own hands. He sent Lamotte, a Hanoverian officer, on a secret mission to Berlin to Sastot, one of the Queen's chamberlains. When Lamotte reached Berlin, he went to Sastot and said, "I am the bearer of a most important confidential message. You must hide me somewhere in your house, that my arrival may remain unknown, and you must manage that one of my letters reaches the king." Sastot promised, but asked if his business were good or evil. "It will be good if people can hold their tongues," said the Hanoverian, "but if they gossip, it will be evil. However, as I know you are discreet, and I require your help in obtaining an interview with the Queen, I must confide all to you. The Prince Frederick intends being here in 3 weeks at the latest. He means to escape secretly from Hanover, brave his father's anger, and marry the princess. He has entrusted me with the whole affair, and has sent me here to find out if his arrival would be agreeable to the king and queen, and if they are still anxious for this marriage. If she is capable of keeping a secret, and has no suspicious people about her, will you undertake to speak to the queen on this subject?" The same evening, the chamberlain went to court and confided to the queen the weighty communication with which he was entrusted. The queen was overjoyed, and the next day communicated the glad news to her daughter. "I shall at length see you happy, and my wishes realized at the same time." "How much joy at once!" cried the queen. "I kissed her hand," said Wilhelmina, "which I covered with tears. "You are crying," my mother exclaimed. "What is the matter?" I would not disturb her happiness, so I answered, "The thought of leaving you distresses me more than all the crowns in the world could delight me." The queen was only the more tender towards me in consequence, and then left me. I loved this dear mother truly, and had only spoken the truth to her. She left me in a terrible state of mind. I was cruelly torn between my affection for her and my repugnance for the prince, but I determined to leave all to Providence, which should direct my ways. The queen held a reception the same evening, and as ill luck would have it, the English envoy Bourgois came. The queen, forgetting her prudence and thinking the plan was well matured, actually confided to him the prince's project. Bourgois, overwhelmed with astonishment, asked the queen if it were really true. "Certainly," she replied, "and to show you how true it is, he has sent me Lamotte here, who has already informed the king of everything." "Oh, why does your majesty tell me this? I am wretched, for I must prevent it," exclaimed the envoy. Greatly dismayed, the queen asked him why. "Because I am my sovereign's envoy, because my office requires it of me that I should inform him of so important a matter. I shall send off a messenger to England this very evening. Would to God I had known nothing of this." The queen entreated him not to do so, but he was firm, and despatched the messenger to England. Thus did Queen Sophie Dorothea defeat the scheme for which she had toiled many years at the very moment of its fruition. On receipt of the news, George II sent Colonel Lorne to Hanover, with commands to bring the prince over to England without an instant's delay. When Lorne arrived at Hanover a few days later, he found Prince Frederick giving a ball at Herrenhausen. He gave the king's message, and acted with so much dispatch that at the end of the ball the prince, escorted by Lorne and attended by only one servant, quitted Hanover forever. His plot had failed. There was nothing else to be done. The rage and disappointment when the news of the prince's departure reached the court of Berlin was very great. The queen blustered and swore, called Wilhelmina English canaille, and beat her and her brother in a shocking manner. The queen broke down and took to her bed. Wilhelmina fainted away. But it was all to no purpose. Not only her marriage, but the double marriage scheme vanished into thin air. Frederick did not find a warm welcome awaiting him from his parents. The prince landed in England the first week in December, 1728, and made his way to London. He arrived at St. James's without any ceremony, and was smuggled up the back stairs as though he had been a pretender rather than the heir apparent to the crown. Yesterday, we read, His Royal Highness Prince Frederick came to Whitechapel about 7 in the evening, and proceeded thence privately in a hackney coach to St. James's. His Royal Highness alighted at the Friary and walked down to the Queen's back stairs, and was there conducted to Her Majesty's apartment. It must have been a strange meeting between mother and son. The Queen received him amiably. The succession could not be altered, so she determined to make the best of him, but the King was very harsh. George had an unnatural and deep-rooted aversion to his eldest son, whom he regarded as necessarily his enemy. This peculiarity was hereditary in the House of Hanover for some generations, for the sovereign and his firstborn were always at war with one another. Some pity must be extended to the young prince, who never had a fair chance. He was only 22 years of age when he came to England, and he found himself among strangers and enemies in a country of which he knew nothing. He was very shy and frightened at first, and his father's manner did not tend to reassure him. Lord Hervey says that, whenever the prince was in the room with him, the king, it put one in mind of stories that one has heard of ghosts that appear to part of the company, but are invisible to the rest, and in this manner, wherever the prince stood, though the king passed him ever so often, or ever so near, it always seemed as if the king thought the prince filled a void of space. The prince did not dine in public at St. James the Sunday after his arrival, but the queen suffered him to hand her into her pew at the Chapel Royal, and this was his first appearance before the English court. But however much his parents might slight him, the fact remained that he was, by Act of Parliament, heir to the throne, and through the insistence of the Privy Council, the king soon after his arrival created him Prince of Wales. But he was careful not to give him the allowance of £100,000 a year, which had been voted by Parliament for the Prince of Wales in the civil list. True, Parliament had given the king control over the prince's income, and he exercised it by giving him only a small allowance. The young prince quickly made friends, some of them not of a very desirable character. He had been taught to speak English fairly well, and he had pleasant manners. He inherited from his mother a taste for letters, and he also possessed the art of dissimulation and a love of intrigue. He had not the slightest affection for either of his parents. How could he have? And he soon began to deceive them, a task in which he found plenty to help him. Lady Bristol, in one of her letters, gave a very flattering account of him, being the most agreeable young man it is possible to imagine, without being the least handsome. His person little, but very well made and genteel. A loveliness in his eyes that is indescribable, and the most obliging address that can be conceived. The poets praised him, and one sycophant rhapsodized over him as follows: "Fresh as a rosebud newly blown and fair as opening lilies, on whom every eye with joy and admiration dwells. See, see, he rides on his docile barb with manly grace. Is it Adonis for the chase, arrayed, or Britain's second hope?" First hope, presumably, was the king. The other hopes were the rest of the royal children. They were not a lovable family, nor was there any love lost among them. They disliked one another thoroughly, but with the exception of Frederick, they were all devoted to their mother, and they all united, Frederick included, in disliking their father, who on his part disliked them. The king had rarely a kind word for any of his children, and in his old age he admitted, "I know I did not love my children," he said. "When they were young, I hated to have them running about the room." Caroline, on the other hand, was devoted to all of her children, except the Prince of Wales, whom long absence had estranged from her. One of her first acts after becoming queen was to dismiss the state governess and have her daughters educated under her immediate supervision. She was a Spartan mother and a firm believer in the proverb, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." The Duchess of Marlborough relates how on one occasion, when she went to see the Queen, then Princess of Wales, she found her chastising little Prince William, who was roaring and kicking lustily. The prince was looking on complacently. The Duchess tried to soothe the youthful delinquent. "Ah, see," cried George Augustus, "you English are none of you well bred, because you were not whipped when you were young." "Umph," quoth Grace. She afterwards said, "I thought to myself, I am sure you could not have been whipped when you were young, but I choked it in." Anne, Princess Royal, was now in her 20th year. She had little beauty, and her figure was short and squat, but she had fair abilities and several accomplishments. She could paint well, speak 3 languages, and was an excellent musician. Her favorite recreation was the opera, and she loved to get professional singers and players around her and practice with them. She was vain and ambitious, and once told her mother she wished she had no brothers so that she might succeed the throne. On the Queen's reproving her, she said, "I would die tomorrow to be queen today." Unfortunately for her ambition, heirs to the throne or reigning monarchs were in no wise attracted to her, and so far no eligible candidate for her hand had come forward. The Queen also once rebuked her for her lack of consideration to her ladies. She noticed one morning that she kept her ladies standing for a long time, conversing with her on some trifling matter, while she herself remained seated. In the evening Anne came to her mother to read to her, and was about to sit down. "No, my dear," said the Queen, "you must not sit down at present. I intend to keep you standing for as long as the time you kept Lady Blank in the same position this morning." The second daughter, Princess Amelia, or Emily, as she was more generally called, was better looking than her sister and far cleverer. In her youth she had considerable pretension to beauty, and her ready wit made her the most popular of the princesses. "The Princess Amelia," writes Lady Pomfret enthusiastically to Mrs. Clayton, "is the oddest, or at least one of the oddest princesses that was ever known. She has her ears shut to flattery, and her heart open to honesty. She has an honor, justice, good nature, sense, wit, resolution, and more good qualities than I have time to tell you, so mixed that, if one is not a devil, it is impossible to say she has too much or too little of any. Yet all these do not in anything, without exception, make her forget the King of England's daughter, which dignity she keeps up with such obliging behavior that she charms everybody. Do not believe her complaisance to me makes me say one syllable more than the rigid truth, though I confess she has gained my heart, and has added one more to the number of those few whose desert forces affection. This paragon of a princess has been the destined bride of the Crown Prince of Prussia after Frederick the Great, but as the double marriage scheme fell through, she continued single. Several minor German princes offered themselves, but she did not think them worthy of her acceptance. Yet she was far from indifferent to admiration, and had a liking for men's society. She was of a masculine turn of mind, and her happiest hours were passed in the hunting field, and the stables and the kennels. She liked to spend much of her time with her horses, and discussed their points minutely with the grooms, and one Sunday she shocked the good people of Hampton Court by going to church in riding costume with a dog under each arm. She shared her father's passion for hunting, and was a far better rider than he. She used to hunt in a costume which was masculine rather than feminine, and rode hard and fearlessly, followed by her favorite groom Spurrier. There is a curious portrait of her in a round hunting cap and laced scarlet coat, which makes her look like a man. She had flirtations with the Duke of Newcastle and the Duke of Grafton. That with the latter was serious. It went on for a long time, and the princess really seems to have been attached to him, though he was much older than she. The Duke of Grafton, the Lord Chamberlain, was a grandson of Charles II, and had a personal beauty and charm of manner characteristic of the Fitzroys. He made no secret of his attentions to the princess, and she received them with a great deal of favor. Queen Caroline was annoyed at what she considered was the Duke's presumption in aspiring to be her daughter's lover. She also resented his familiar manner towards herself. He frequently addressed her as though he were her equal, and indeed he considered himself to be a scion of royalty. He once told her that he believed it was not in her nature to love anyone, to which she replied, "But I love the king." He answered, "By God, ma'am, I do not know, but if I were the king of France, I would soon find out whether you did or not." He used to tease her along with the tale that she was in love with some German prince before her marriage to the Electoral Prince of Hanover, and ended by saying, "God, ma'am, I wish I could see the man you could love." As she could not repress him, Caroline affected to treat these familiarities as joke, but she secretly resented them. She did her best to put an end to the intimacy between her daughter and the Duke, but without much effect. The Princess Amelia and the Duke would go a-hunting together 2 or 3 times a week, and frequently rode away from the rest of the party. On one occasion at Windsor, their attendants lost them altogether, and they did not return to the castle till long after it was dark. It was said they had gone together to a private house in Windsor Forest and remained there. The king was absent from England at the time this happened, but the queen was highly incensed, and soundly rated Amelia on her imprudence. She would have complained to the king about the Duke of Grafton, but Walpole dissuaded her from doing so. The Duke would not have cared, and it would have done the princess harm. The year after the king's accession to the throne, Princess Amelia went to Bath to drink the waters, attended by Lady Pomfret. Royal visits to Bath were as yet few and far between. Indeed, the only royal personages who had visited Bath before the princess were Queen Anne, before she came to the throne, with her husband Prince George of Denmark. Prince Amelia was received by the mayor and corporation in full state, and 100 young men on horseback met her coach at the North Gate and formed an escort to her lodgings. Bath had already become a gay and fashionable place, and many persons of quality and of no quality at all, who suffered from gout, rheumatism, the results of dissipation, or that mysterious ailment which the ladies of the 18th century called vapors, flocked thither to drink the waters and kill the time. The pump room and assembly rooms were elegantly fitted, and a band played daily. Breakfast parties were much the vogue at 1 and 20 apiece, and the forenoon was passed in drinking the waters and listening to the concert. In the afternoon there were the bowling greens and the promenade in the gardens skirting the river, the toy shops and the coffee houses where the beau monde loitered, drinking dishes of tea and eating Bath buns. In the evening there were cards and dancing, and there was scandal all day long. Bath was then under the reign of King Nash, who had become its arbiter elegantiarum. Opinions differed as to the services Nash rendered to Bath. Some say he made the place, others that he had merely cloaked the grossness and licentiousness of the fashionable world there by throwing over it a garb of mock ceremony. Certainly Bath was a hotbed of gambling, and many undesirable characters were attracted thither simply by the high play. Princess Anne's arrival caused quite a flutter in the gay world of Bath. She took the waters in the morning, and after drinking them strolled in Harrison's walks, all the men and women of fashion following after her, or keeping within a respectful distance. But there was one who would not pay her homage, and she was Lady Wigton, a Jacobite peeress. One day in the public gardens, Lady Wigton met the princess face to face, and without taking the slightest notice of her, she pushed aside the ladies-in-waiting and walked past. Of this incident Lady Pomfret writes to Mrs. Clayton, "Lady Frances Manners asked me if I knew my Lady Wigton, a Scottish countess. I said I had never heard of her in my life, and believed she had not yet sent to the princess, upon which both she and the Duchess of Rutland smiled, and said, 'No, nor will, I can tell you,' for seeing the princess coming to the pump the morning before, she had run away like a fury for fear of seeing her, and declares so public an aversion for the king, etc., that she would not go to the ball made on the queen's birthday, and some of that subscription money remaining, the company had another ball, which she denied going to, and told all the people it was because the queen's money made it. These balls began at 6 o'clock in the evening, and were under the direction of Beau Nash, who commanded that they should be over by 11 at the latest. When the first stroke of the hour sounded, the beau waved his wand, and the music ceased, though it were in the middle of a dance. Once Prince Amelia objected to this summary ending. "One more dance, Mr. Nash. Remember, I am princess." "Yes, madam, but I reign here, and my law must be kept." It was creditable to the Princess Amelia that Lady Wigton's rudeness made no difference to her courtesy to the other Jacobites and Roman Catholics, of whom just then Bath was full. Acting under the instruction from her mother, she had a gracious word and a smile for all of them who came her way. Among others were the unfortunate Lord Widdrington and his lady. Lord Widdrington was one of the Jacobite peers condemned to death for the part they had taken in the Rising of 15, but he was ultimately pardoned, though his estates were forfeited. He brought his broken health and ruined fortunes to Bath, where he was living in comparative poverty when the Princess Amelia came there. The princess noticed Lady Widdrington in the pump-room and asked who she was. When she was told, she talked to her, walked with her, and generally took much more notice of her. Her kindness, writes Lady Pomfret, had such an effect upon all that sort, Jacobites, in this city that it is hardly to be imagined, and they all speak of the Princess Amelia as of something that has charmed them ever since. But another lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Tichburn, was perturbed lest the princess's graciousness to a rebel's wife should be misunderstood, and Lady Pomfret thought it well to ask Mrs. Clayton to explain the matters to the Queen. She need not have troubled, for the princess had only done as the Queen wished. It is a pity that we cannot take leave of the Princess Amelia with this pleasant illustration of her amiability. But truth compels us to add that as she grew older, her character sadly deteriorated. She developed into a hard, mean, inquisitive woman, and was often insolent without provocation. Perhaps this was due to the crossing of her young affections, and her nature, driven back upon itself, grew warped in the cramped atmosphere of the court. In later life, Bath continued to be a favorite resort of the Princess Amelia, for here she could indulge in her love of cards and scandal without let or hindrance. She used to play night after night for very high stakes, refreshing herself with pinches of snuff during the game. One night when she was playing in the public card-room at Bath, an old general who was seated next to her ventured to take a pinch of snuff out of her box, which stood by him on the table. She haughtily stared at him without making any remark, and then beckoning to her footman, ordered him to throw the snuff in the fire and bring her a fresh box. Little peculiarities like this did not tend to make her popular, and she grew to be generally disliked. She lived far into the reign of her nephew, George III, and died unmarried. The third daughter, Princess Caroline, was of a very different disposition to her elder sisters. She had no beauty, and suffered from delicate health, but she had much quiet goodness and unobtrusive piety. When she was a child, her parents used to say of her, "Send for Caroline, and then we shall know the truth." She was the Queen's favorite daughter, and was greatly attached to her. Constantly with her mother, she was thrown a good deal into the companionship of Lord Hervey, and conceived for him a deep and lasting love, a most unfortunate attachment, as Lord Hervey was by no means a worthy object for her devotion, even if he had been able to requite it properly, which he could not, as he was married to the beautiful Lapel. Her attachment flattered his vanity, and he must have secretly encouraged it. The hopelessness of her passion made no difference to the gentle princess. She continued to cherish it until Lord Hervey's death, and even after his death she testified her devotion to his memory by showing great kindness to his children. After she lost her mother, she became a confirmed invalid and spent her life in retirement and works of benevolence. She died unmarried. William, Duke of Cumberland, the second surviving son of George II and Caroline, was, at the time they came to the throne, a boy, and had not yet developed those unamiable qualities he displayed later in life, which earned for him undying infamy as the Butcher of Culloden. He was a precocious youth, very grave and solemn in his demeanor, not caring to play like other boys, but preferring to mope in a corner over a book, or gaze at uniforms and military evolutions, for quite early in life he showed a strong predilection for the army. Some characteristic anecdotes are related of his early years. When a child, he was taken on one of his birthdays to see his grandfather, George I. The king asked him at what time he got up in the morning. The young duke replied, "When the chimney-sweepers are about." The king asked, "What are the chimney sweepers?" "Have you been so long in England," said his grandson, "and do not know what a chimney sweep is? Why, he is like that man there." And he pointed to Lord Finch, afterwards Earl of Winchelsea and Nottingham, who was in attendance. Lord Finch, like the rest of his family, the black funereal Finches, had a very swarthy complexion, and after this he was generally known by the nickname of the chimney sweep. On another occasion, after a display of temper, his mother ordered the Duke to be locked up in his room. When he came out he was downcast and sullen. "William," inquired the Queen, "what have you been doing?" "Reading," he said shortly. "Reading what?" "The Bible." "And what did you read there?" "About Jesus and Mary." "And what about them?" asked the Queen. "Why," replied William, "that Jesus said to Mary, 'Woman, what hast thou to do with me?'" Lady Stratford has left an account of the Duke of Cumberland's birthday reception, a sort of child's party which represents the young prince in a more amiable light. "My love, her son, Lord Wentworth," she writes, "is perfectly well and vastly delighted with his court ball. I took him to court in the morning, and the Queen cried out, 'Oh, Lord Wentworth, how do you do? You have mightily grown.' My lady, he is prodigiously well dressed. I hope you will let him come to our ball tonight." After the drawing-room was over, the Duke had a levee in his own room, so I desired my brother to take him there, and the Duke told him that he hoped he would do him the favour to come at night. But as a great misfortune, Lady Deloraine fell in labour, and was just brought to bed of a dead son, so they could not have the room they used to dance in, it being next to hers, so they had a bad little room, and they did not dance French dances. Princess Amelia asked Lord Wentworth to dance one with her, and afterwards the Duke gave him Lady Caroline Fitzroy for his partner. They had a supper of cold chicken, tongue, jelly, and sweetmeats, but they were served in an odd manner, for they had neither knives nor plates, so that while as my love loves eating, he says he ate but a leg of a chicken, for he says he did not think it looked well to be pulling greasy bones about in a room full of princesses. The way of getting rid of the bones was the children threw them out the window. The king was present to see them dance, but not the Queen. The ball ended about half an hour after 10. The Duke was quite free and easy and extremely civil. Of the two younger princesses, Mary and Louisa, there is little to be said, as they were children during their mother's lifetime. Mary, like her sister Caroline, was of soft and gentle disposition. Some years after her mother's death, she was married to Frederick, hereditary Prince of Hesse-Cassel, an obstinate, ill-tempered prince who treated his wife with cruelty and infidelity, and her life was a very unhappy one. She survived her husband a few years. Princess Louisa, the youngest of them all, was by far the most beautiful of Queen Caroline's daughters, and inherited her mother's abilities and accomplishments. She married Frederick, Crown Prince of Denmark, and in due time became Queen of Denmark. Her married life was not altogether happy, but she had her mother's philosophy and made the best of it. She died of the same illness as Queen Caroline, and curiously enough from the same cause, concealing the nature of her malady until it was too late. Though the king enjoyed an enormous civil list, he was exceedingly mean to his children. To his daughters, though 3 of them had now grown up, he gave little or nothing. Anne and Amelia were often in need of pocket money, and not above borrowing of the people about the court. Their dress allowance was exceedingly small, and if their mother had not helped them, they would scarcely have been able to make a presentable appearance at their father's drawing-rooms. There is a curious old paper extant, endorsed Mrs. Powys, who was probably dresser to the princesses, which gives some idea of their wardrobe. The following extracts may be quoted. What was delivered yearly for each princess, Anne, Amelia, and Caroline? Winter clothes. 2 coats embroidered, 1 trimmed or rich stuff, 1 velvet or rich silk without. 3 coats brocaded or damask. A damask nightgown. 2 silk under petticoats trimmed with gold or silver. Summer clothes. 3 flowered coats, 1 of them silver. 3 plain or stripped lastrings, 1 nightgown, and 4 silk hoops. Shoes, a pair every week. Gloves, 16 dozen in the year, 18 cents per dozen. Tans, no allowance, but they did not exceed 8 guineas per annum. Mousselines and lawns were bought as wanted, no settled price. Sundries. No certain allowance for ribbons or artificial flowers. Powder, patch, comb, pins, quilted caps, bandboxes, wax, pens, and paper came to about £40 per annum for the 3 princesses. Paste for hands and pomatum came from the apothecary, Mr. Tager, and did not come into my bill. I paid the tire woman 129 guineas a year. I paid for tuning the harpsichord, food for their birds, and many other little things belonging to their royal highnesses, which were too trifling to mention, which whilst the Duke was with them came to £50 per annum. Their royal highnesses had each a page of honour and gentleman usher at £100 salary. Each one had a dresser at £50, and one chambermaid, I do not know at what salary. Also 1 page of the back stairs. The princesses used the Queen's coaches, footmen, and grooms. The princesses led singularly idle, purposeless lives. Anne and Amelia chiefly occupied themselves with card-playing and the petty intrigues of the court, and the way their father treated them led them early to lie and practice the arts of dissimulation. Even Princess Caroline, when we have credited her with all the virtues, remains a colourless nonentity. The princesses always appeared at court festivities and took part in whatever was going on, and the Queen would often relax some of the stiffness of etiquette for the benefit of the young people. For instance, sometimes after the evening drawing-rooms, she would turn the function into a ball. We read, "On Monday night, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal opened a ball at court with a minuet, and after they danced several set dances, with several of the quality till between 4 and 5 next morning. Her Majesty was richly dressed, and wore a flowered muslin hood with an edging. The Princess Royal had the like, which makes it believed that muslins will come into fashion. There was never seen so great an appearance, either for number or magnificence, as on the like occasion. Nor was the king to be outdone in the splendor of his attire. Indeed, he outshone the Queen, for he loved dress and display far more. We read, His Majesty appeared in a suit of crimson velvet, with gold buttons and buttonholes, sleeves faced with rich tissue, and a waistcoat of the same. The great days at court were the royal birthdays. The birthdays of the Prince of Wales and all the royal children were duly celebrated. The Queen's birthdays were always largely attended, and so were the King's at the beginning of the reign. But after his visits to Hanover, he became very unpopular, and he noted with ire that not only was the attendance meagre at his drawing-rooms, but there were no new clothes for the occasion. If any of the great nobility absented themselves from the drawing-rooms for any time, as sometimes occasionally thought fit to do, they were generally conciliated by the Queen and persuaded to put in an appearance again. The birthday drawing-rooms were chiefly remarkable for the splendor of the clothes, everyone appearing in his best, and even royal footmen being arrayed in new liveries. There was His Majesty in scarlet and gold, writes a correspondent, the Duke of Cumberland in blue trimmed with silver, the Princess Anne in silver and colours of yellow, and the Princess Louisa in dark green velvet, embroidered in gold, my Lady Brown in scarlet, with great roses not unlike large silver soup plates, made in an old silver lace and spotted all over her gown. But these were great occasions. In the ordinary way, the private life of the court was dull, even in the early days of the reign, and there was little to do except ombre or quadrille. Peter Wentworth, who was now one of the King's equerries and sometimes in attendance on the Prince of Wales and sometimes on the Princess Royal, gives a fair description of how the royal family spent their evenings. Writing to his brother Lord Strafford, he says, "The quadrille table is well known, and there is a large table surrounded by my master, the Prince of Wales, the princesses, the Duke of Cumberland, the bedchamber ladies, Lord Lumley, and all the belle assemblée, at the most stupid game to my mind, lottery ticket. £100 is sometimes lost at this pastime. The maids play below with the King in Mrs. Howard's apartment, and the minute they come up, the Queen starts up and goes into her apartment. The other night, Lord Graham and the Queen had a dispute about going to a room without passing by the back stairs. She bade him go and see. He did, and came back as positive as before. 'Well,' says she, 'will you come along with me if I show you the way?' Yes, madam, he says. Up she starts and trots away with one candle, and came back triumphant over my Lord Grantham. The belle assemblée was in an uproar, thinking the king was ill, when I told them 'twas a wager between the queen and my Lord Grantham. The queen was fond of these little jokes, for on another occasion we find Peter Wentworth writing, "Sunday in the evening the queen commanded me to order her a chaise and 1 horse, and a coach and 6 to follow, for Monday at 6 o'clock in the morn, and 6 life-guards and 2 grenadiers, and your humble servant a horseback, which was to be kept a great secret. When I had put her majesty into her chaise with Princess Mary, she bid me ride and tell the colonel of the guard not to beat the drum as she passed out of St. James's. We drove to the foot ferry at Kew, where there was a barge of 4 oars which carried her majesty, Princess Mary, and Mrs. Purcell and I to the queen's house at Kew. The whole joke of keeping this a secret was upon Lord Lifford, who had said 'twas impossible for her majesty to go out at any time but he should know it. When we came there, therefore, the queen sent for the other princesses, Lord Hervey and Lord Lifford, to breakfast with her. Lord Hervey, Princess Caroline, and Princess Louisa came before 10. The queen, Mrs. Purcell, and I walked twice around the garden before they came. We had a fine breakfast, with the addition of cherries and strawberries we plucked from the garden, some of which the queen gave to me with her own hand, and said to Lord Hervey, "C'est un très bon enfant," and repeated it several times, Lord Hervey assenting. I never suspected she spoke of me, which she, perceiving, said in English, "We are speaking of you. You know I love you, and you shall know I love you. I do really love you." I made low bows, but had not the impromptu wit nor assurance to make any other such answer. And again, on Saturday, when the queen was at Kew, the blue horse guards in stocks and sentries stood there. As she goes up the court, she says to Lord Lifford and me, "I'll lay you what you will. He of the right is a Scotsman, and he of the left an Englishman and a Yorkshireman." When she came up to them, she asked him of the right, who was a handsome young fellow and a gentleman volunteer, "What countryman are you?" "A Scotsman, your majesty." "What's your name?" "Hamilton." "Of which family?" "The Duke's of that name." "How long have you been in the regiment?" "Ever since it had been the Duke of Argyle's." Then she turns to the other man and asks, "What countryman was he?" "An Englishman, your majesty." "Your name?" "Hill." "What country?" "Yorkshire." The queen was pleased, and so was I, for I would always have her pleased, and turned to my lord and me and said, "N'est-ce pas que j'ai dit vrai? Je connais bien la physiognomie." End of chapter 4.